Welcome to Chief Evangelist. I'm your host, Ethan Beute. I'm on a mission to explore and understand the role of the Chief Evangelist and the movement behind it. How should CEOs be thinking about it? How does it benefit the company? Which companies and markets need evangelism most? What does the work involve? What does success look like? And who's a good fit as a Chief Evangelist? That's what we're exploring at chiefevangelist.com and in conversations like this one. We're learning from a domain evangelist. His domain, digital transformation. Among the various roles he served in, computer forensic examiner with the FBI, director of information services with the Kansas City Police Department, chief information officer with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, director of innovation and technology with the city of Sioux Falls, and business development for smart cities with Cisco. The themes throughout: digital transformation. That is his domain. Mike Grigsby, welcome to Chief Evangelist.
Ethan, thank you for having me on. Listening to that intro, sounds like you're going to have about 17 people on the podcast.
It does. And we're going to get into, we might spend more time in your career arc and how you arrived at this kind of evangelist mindset and situation. But I want to start with kind of the key question that I ask everybody, which is, what is the most important job of an evangelist?
That's that's a great question. Great way to jump off into it. And I think it's going to be challenging to answer that question without looking at the word evangelist and kind of common thinking around that, right? It has this religious context and it has this philosophical context. And I think, to be very frank about it, I think the primary role of an evangelist is to spread the good news, right? Whatever it is, whether it's about a particular product, whether it's about a domain, whatever it is, I think its job and primary role is to just spread the good news. I think the other side to that, and maybe even a deeper element, is to pave the way, prepare the way, right? There is this educational and awareness element around evangelism that I think should not be dismissed or certainly shouldn't be overlooked. And the ability of an evangelist, somebody that can make the rough places plain, right? Kind of demystify things and help people get this aha moment. I think that's one of the core attributes of an evangelist.
I love it. Okay, there's so many directions I could go, but I'm going to go with the aha moment. Talk about the importance of the aha moment for anyone associated with the education, the awareness, the enthusiasm, the passion of an evangelist. Talk about the aha moment for people in a room, in a crowd, on the other side of a laptop screen, whatever the case may be.
I think it always comes from, you've hit that moment when they're like, I never thought about it that way, right? That's what you want to hear on the other side to the people or room or audience that you're talking to. Like, I never thought about it that way, right? The ability to take some aspect, whether it feels complex and hairy and just, this massive thing, and break it down to a point where people are like, okay, I'm starting to get that now. I remember a long time ago, maybe you remember them also. Remember these things called stereograms? They were these abstract art that, if you looked at it in a particular way, this three-dimensional image would emerge from it, right? And if you got it, no amount of trying to help somebody else see it ever seemed to work, right? That people always had to have it revealed for themselves. But I think that kind of paints this picture of what the evangelist does. Is there's this patient communication, there's this understanding, there's clearly a knowledge of the image that's there, and then just working with people and telling story and say, can you see this edge of the thing? Can you see this aspect of the thing? Can you understand how this part fits together with that part? And then they start to see the emergence of this image, and they get the aha moment.
I love the metaphor so much. First, because it takes me back to when shopping malls, indoor shopping malls were still a thing. And I can just remember, like, there's like an internal display with like 100 of these things. Yes. People just walk around and stand and the other reason I love it is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once the switch has been flipped, you can't turn it back off. And it's such a joy. I'm going to get into personality characteristics because you have a lot of different ways to think about or position yourself. It's a privilege that you've earned. And this idea of the joy for you of seeing that aha moment. For me, it's one of the, I've always enjoyed that, especially in a live room. And it's one of the things that's so frustrating about operating in like large virtual environments is like,
Yeah.
you don't get that energy, you don't get that feedback, you don't see who in the room or in the space has had that moment with you. You might get it as a follow-up, as a LinkedIn message or an email, like, hey, thanks so much for the time today. That was
Right.
amazing. It really made me start thinking about it, really turned me on to it, really opened my eyes to X, Y, or Z. Talk a little bit about what that means for you. Like, I feel like there's a personality type that is more this education, awareness, aha orientation. Do you see that in yourself? And when did you get in touch with that? What does that mean for you?
I I think you're absolutely right. I think people have said to me before, like, "Oh, you're such a great teacher. You're such a great instructor." I don't know that I have a passion for instruction or education as much as I have a passion for seeing that light bulb moment in other people. I know what that light bulb moment feels to me. Oh my gosh, I never saw that before. And like you said, I can't unsee that again, right? And so I love that feeling. And I want with a deep, deep, deep passion for other people to have that kind of aha moment. It feels so good. So a lot of times people have said, "Oh, Mike, you just want to be a leader, or you're just looking for positional angles, or you just want to be in front of the crowd and you want the spotlight on you." I don't. I really don't want the spotlight. But sometimes those are the only places where I can get in front of people and help them have that aha moment. Right. I'm not looking for quote unquote the climbing the ladder or so forth. So I think early on I had an uncle, and maybe there were more people in my life that contributed to this, but I remember an uncle who just thought differently than everybody else. And he wasn't crazy. He wasn't like that eccentric uncle. He just was like, well, if you turn your head this way, don't you see it different? Like, I mean, he just had this, this really kind of nonchalant way of just looking at things differently. His role was he ended up retiring as a cartographer for Amtrak. So those are two very antiquated antiquated titles, but it just the way that he looked at the world was very, very differently, and that sparked something in me.
I love it. Talk about digital transformation in particular. One of the reasons I opted to run through a variety of your positions is that, I wanted this through thread. I'm sure at some point, um, in some of these roles, you recognize the need for transformation. Perhaps there was some motivation around you and some support around you. You got excited about it. You probably started, this is all speculation as a setup to have you correct me, but like, you probably saw some of the benefits of early transformation efforts, 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe. You started seeing the benefits for other people. You got excited about it. You were turning other people onto this idea. And that's what it takes, I guess, to start creating significant change, which digital transformation can mean a lot of different things. The one thing I think everyone would agree on is that it is a fundamental change, not just in practice, but also in mindset and approach. And so, talk about the emergence of digital transformation. Is that this thing that lit you up and motivated you to light other people up on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, kind of leading into what that arc looks like because, looking back at my own at my own resume, I start to wonder, did I really understand or did I have a clue as to what was going on, or is this just pure chaos? Maybe I've reached mad genius stage, or maybe it's just chaos. But right out of high school, I went into the military and I had a chance to get around the world, and I highly recommend people being able to travel, especially outside. If you've only grown up in the US, get outside, see the way the rest of the world is. But I went from a military technician to a graphic designer to a web and marketing specialist to a police officer to a CIO to a smart cities business development person to digital transformation. And again, you look across it and like, what is the common thread? And I started taking a look a few years back. I started looking at my own career, and I realized that the common thread was me. And I know, thank you, Captain Obvious, for that, right? it's more than just me being the person in them. There is something about me that looks for that transformative component across all of that. I remember the first time that I got into graphic design, I was like, oh my gosh, this was at a time when we were moving from hand-drawn stuff to computer and really allowing the computer to do things. And watching what technology could do to accelerate effectiveness and efficiencies and economies, I started seeing that across a bunch of different things. And then we got into this brand new thing called the World Wide Web and the information superhighway and how that can connect us and with all this knowledge. And, I just had these great inflection points across my career where here now, I remember I was in public sector. It was the first time that I had served in a CIO role in public sector, and I was working for the police department. And Adobe, of all companies, Adobe made the change to software as a service, right? It used to be you could buy this annual, or this perpetual license of this thing and keep it forever, and be eons beyond the current version and so forth. But Adobe made the switch. I'm guessing maybe that was probably 2009, 2010. And I looked at that and said, the world has changed. We no longer can think the same way that we've been thinking. And at the time, I remember just the look of consternation on my finance director's face as I was trying to explain to them that I needed this bucket of money ongoing year after year after year when they had been programmed and conditioned to look for big buckets of money one time, and then maybe we'll do it 10 years from now or 7 years from now or whatever the case is. And it was that shift of thinking that really cemented in my mind about what digital transformation was going to do. And I knew in that instance that public sector, meaning government in particular, public sector was going to have to completely reinvent itself in order to match what this growing trends were going to be. And I think honestly, Ethan, I think that's what digital transformation means to me, is this notion of constant evolution, right? I had a college professor years ago who gave me probably two of the greatest nuggets of truth in my entire life. One, there is no place called smooth sailing, and two, everything is subject to change. And this idea that we are constantly evolving, constantly moving forward. Look at all of, Jim Collins wrote a great book, Good to Great. And he talks about the companies that shifted and the ones that didn't, right? And we see this constantly playing out across so many different organizations and industries where they don't make the shift. They don't realize that you have to constantly evolve into the new thing, and they get left behind, or, they become defunct. And that for me is one of the most attractive pieces to this. And digital transformation, I think the last part I'll say about this is there is this subjective element around change. Do you think I should change into this, or do you think I should change into this? Is it the book you read or the book I read? When we look at this through the lens of technology and the impacts that technology is having on our organizations, it becomes a very objective conversation very, very quickly. We see costs, we see impact, we see all of this happening through a very objective lens, which allows us to then steer the subjective sides of that conversation in a very different way and meaningful way, as opposed to just, this is my opinion versus your opinion.
Man, so much good stuff in there. I guess I'll pick up on this idea of change, and I'm going to grossly stereotype the public sector because, you mentioned Jim Collins, Good to Great. We can talk about these businesses that got out innovated and, fundamentally disrupted, and they go out of business. The public sector, it's a different dynamic. There's no shutting down the city.
Right.
You might change, the way the resources dedicated to public transportation or public safety are allocated, but you can't not have it. It can't be out innovated. To date, so far, I don't see us privatizing public safety across a municipal area in the near future. I don't know.
Right.
You might have some opinions about that, but where I'm going with this is, I think the general outsider's view of the public sector is it's slower to change. It's probably more fixed in its ways. I don't know how fair that is. I think we can certainly characterize large swaths of the private sector the same way.
Sure.
So that's not really my interest. My interest is in this idea of entrepreneur versus intrapreneur, the idea of going out into the world, with this vision, with this view, with this innovative approach, this willingness to be in a position of change all of the time, versus being inside this very large and established institutional type of entity and trying to create that same spark and evangelize and support change. Talk about the gap or the difference between entrepreneur and intrapreneur, because I know you do a ton of work in the private sector too. Talk about the divide there. What is the challenge? And then maybe where I'm kind of heading is this idea of evangelism being critical to the transformation itself, because the transformation isn't just about what book should we read to help us know what direction to go, to help us know which tool to buy, to help us know which company to engage, to help us install this new thing. It's obviously hearts and minds. It's not just the
Very
practical
so.
side. So start, I guess, with the entrepreneur piece. I just want to forecast where I think we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take a quick step back, because
Please.
I definitely want to get into the intrapreneur versus entrepreneur. But you mentioned about public sector, kind of there's no shutting down or there's no being defunct in that respect. In 2020, we had a very interesting dynamic around what happens when public sector doesn't continuously evolve, not just to meet constituent demand, but to understand the changing landscape. And this was with the defund the police, right? We saw some tragic incidents around this when the public got fed up with how policing was handled. Now, as a former police officer, I will say that the whole defund the police as is message is not right. I will also be the first to say policing has to change and evolve, right? There are new ways and new dynamics that we just can't accept anymore from a policing standpoint. And when the public gets to a point, reaches a threshold when they don't believe that their public sector as an organization is delivering and meeting demands, we start to see these incidents like that. So we probably won't have time to get off into that, and that's probably a separate podcast all on its own. But I did want to make the kind of draw the arc there, or draw the comparison, that there are moments, and we see them here really just recently, we see how that plays out when public organizations, public entities don't continuously rise to meet the needs. Circling
there is a lot. I kind of want to go there, but I just out of discipline, I know that we can't.
We'll do that on the next
really
one.
Interesting that the key phrase that you had me echoing on was this idea of public service, right? Our job is to serve the public, and the public's needs, the public's wants, the public's expectations, the public's tolerance for different things is constantly evolving, and it requires constant change. So yes, right. And we're going to have that conversation. We probably just won't record and release it as a podcast. Right. We're going to have that conversation.
I love it. So this notion of intrapreneur, entrepreneur is one that I think it goes back to, you started to say this earlier about personalities, and personalities do play a little bit into it, but I think it's also what the demand of the role is. For example, I think, just as I've been thinking about this subject, I think there are three key areas where leaders should consider employing the role or the activities of an evangelist. One, if you have a change in market, right? If the market itself is shifting, if your organization is shifting, and if you are looking at an entire industry that is shifting. Those are three key opportunities or key inflection points where leaders should really think about employing that activity or kind of the deliverable of an evangelist. When you look at an organizational change, if the board has gotten together or the key leadership has gotten together and said, we are going to make a change and become this, that's going to have impact to your customers, right? It could have impact to your industry, but it's absolutely going to have impact to your internal, to your employees and so forth. And so you have to have somebody that has this vision, who has the ability to communicate well. I talked about patient communication, understanding, already being able to see the kind of finished picture of that. You have to have somebody to be able to do that, but they're going to be focused in on people, processes, and culture. Those are going to be impacted and shifted in ways that probably most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but you need to have deliberate focus and attention given to, again, people, processes, and culture. On the other side, as you make that shift, you do have to make the change and communicate well with your external stakeholders, your customers, your partners. What does it look like? What does your supply chain look like? What is your, how is that shift in your organization's direction? How is that going to affect all of the stakeholders around? So I think it would be very challenging to find the same person who can have an internal voice as well as an external voice. Maybe they're out there, but I think that's probably a small pond to fish in. The other side is, again, we're back to personality, is who has that external voice, who can reach out and understand that, as well as that internal voice. And, for the internal voice, or maybe even external also, these might not be permanent roles, right? Leaders don't have to automatically start thinking about that permanent, table of organization structure that says I have to have this dedicated role. It could be other duties as assigned. You got to be careful on that. We can visit that if we need to. Or it could just be a temporary role. I'm going to unplug you from this so that you can focus from your other duties, so that you can focus on this for a period of time, and then we'll reassess. Does that become permanent? Can you go back to other duties, and so forth? So I think there's a great kind of differentiation between the internal and external voice there.
I agree. I think one thing that I've heard in talking with people in evangelist positions is that you carry things that you learn out in the market. What is the sentiment? What's the level of understanding? What are the objections and objectives around this thing? And kind of coloring the internal conversation with that perspective and feedback. And then there's also, of course, what's going on inside the organization. How do we think about that and carrying it back out to the market? But you're speaking about it in a unique way that I hadn't really thought about as clearly as you articulated it, which is, what is your general orientation, your general bias? Not even a bias, it's your general objective. Like, what are you trying to do in this evangelist position? I do really want to have a few minutes at least of conversation around this temporary versus permanent. It's something that's kind of bubbled up now and again. It's something I wonder about myself. I was speculating on it on a previous episode with the gentleman named Colin Mitchell about, does this thing time out? And we'll maybe double back into this idea of the really smart characteristics you described in the company, in the market, that say perhaps we should put someone on this mission temporarily or permanently. And like, if it is this kind of permanent thing, I was speculating for myself, what happens when video messaging becomes normalized? Does BombBomb or does the market continue to need an evangelist? Now, in that case, I will have felt like I've been at it long enough. I'm willing to give it up. People understand that this is way better than relying exclusively on faceless typed out text and asynchronous communication. Good job, everybody. And I'm sure BombBomb will have won its fair market share in that process. I still think that is years and years away, because change is so much slower, because it is hearts and minds, it is habits, it's all of this resistance, it's all this comfort in the status quo, et cetera, which is what makes the work so challenging and engaging. But this internal orientation is completely different. I see the internal orientation probably being more likely to be temporary because the organization is here. We need to change trajectory a little bit and get over here, and we only have this amount of time to do it. And we need some support to do that. Look, go in deeper, whatever your thoughts are on temporary versus permanent. Is it different for the intrapreneur versus the entrepreneur, or the outward orientation versus the inward orientation? What have you observed, and or how do you think about that?
What I have observed is a lot of failures. And that has mostly to do with how I love the word that you use, how the organization orients themselves to this role. A lot of times it sounds good. I went to a conference, I read a book, I like the prospects of what this can offer me, but I don't really know how to engage, right? So Bob or Sue or whoever seems to have that charismatic personality, you're going to be now assigned to this role of the evangelist. You like talking to people, you go do that, right? That is a terrible way to go into or introduce and kind of prep the organization for this role, because it feels very it's secondary, feels very slapped on top of, right? It doesn't feel embedded in. One of the things that I think you mentioned in your blog, that I think the way you and I first got connected, you mentioned in your blog or one of the videos that I saw, was one, the evangelist focuses on the problem, not the product. And that is a key component of understanding, one, understanding the role, and two, understanding how to activate that role in the organization or externally to your stakeholders. Because the messaging around this isn't like, hey, I should get you excited about this. The messaging is you have to shift your thinking. I'm not here to tickle your ears. I'm not here to rah and rally and do things like that. That's not the right approach. The right approach is, this is serious business. You have to change your thinking. We are going a different direction. You have to change your thinking. Everything is new. And I'm in front of you now for a period of time because at some point there will be a demonstrative change to this, right? We're leading up to this thing, right? Let's just, I mean, play out a scenario. Let's say that we're going to now work from home. Okay, everybody is going to be in a distributed remote work environment. Okay, well, you have to think about people and processes and culture. And if your culture has been, you have stakeholders who are used to having the water cooler chat or the in-person meeting or the, hey, I always go see so-and-so at this time. There's a human element to this that has been conditioned and programmed and so forth, right? Okay, that is part of the change. And you can't underestimate the impacts that that's going to have on the organization and certainly the directives that you're pushing out there. Okay. So now you have this messaging that goes out there and there's this patience to it, but there is absolutely a directive that is being given by that evangelist. And one of the things that where I have seen the biggest failures in this is that the evangelist has not been enabled or empowered at the highest levels. There almost needs to be kind of an agnostic element to where that evangelist plays within the organization. They should be thinking about product and marketing. They should be thinking about operations. They should be thinking about human resource and talent acquisition. They should be thinking holistically across the organization. So just because Bob or Sue is charismatic doesn't mean that they are equipped to think about the organization in the right way. And subsequently, we see failure in that respect.
Yeah, I think the other kind of key underlying theme in there, and I think you were explicit about it, but it felt implicit at least, is this idea of this isn't rah-rah, this isn't getting people motivated and excited. It's we need to get from here to there, and I am here to facilitate that by switching on the light bulb, changing
Yeah.
your thinking, allowing you to see that 3D thing that otherwise just looks
Yeah,
like this, beautiful, weird pattern on the screen. Talk about the balance of hearts and minds. And what I'm really getting at is I'm kind of doubling back into something you said near the top or a vision you painted for me, which is the evangelist is there to work holistically, work across people, help orient people from here to there. You're not an instructor. I'm not here to say, these are the 18 steps. This is the
correct.
button to click. These are the things to do in this particular order. Hey, you didn't do the things in the right order. Let's do these in the like. It's not instruction. It's this unique position between kind of, and I'm just trying to re-articulate it the way I think I heard you say it. You know, there's a vision or a direction. There's somewhere we need to go. There's something we need to do. There's a way we need to be thinking. I am here to facilitate moving as many of you into this position of understanding that, thinking that way, moving in that direction, and then some other function. In the case that it's customers, it's going to be our onboarding managers or our customer success managers or our account managers are actually going to kind of like get you practically,
Yes,
once you've moved in this direction or across a particular line, maybe, I don't know the right metaphor for that, but there's another function that's going to carry you to the functional success on the other side of this big shift from here to there. Like, am I thinking about that the right way or the same way that you are?
absolutely. Absolutely. When you're talking about organizational change, one of the first things that is going to happen the day after you say, hey, we're going to change, is you're going to get tested. Your your constituents, your customer base, your employee base, they are going to challenge your decision to change. So if you don't have resolve to say this is the direction that we're going to do, we absolutely are going to do this, you will find this kind of muddling going on. Do your mid-level managers, who probably have the greatest level of influence across your entire organization, do your mid-level managers really understand the change that you're directing? Do they understand the practical components that are needed to do that? Are you creating enough bandwidth for them to do that and their existing day job, right? Because they're already giving you 40 plus hours a week, and now you're going to say we're doing this change initiative, right? Are you creating enough bandwidth for them to metabolize the change, and are you supporting them in the right ways, right? The idea that you are having to, your evangelist is getting out there to prepare the way, not instruct the way, to prepare the way and spread the good news of this change, right? It's easy to think like, oh, this is about rallies. This is about, we're going to get cups and mugs that say we're changing. We're going to do all this. That's not what people want. People want to know you are serious about this because they need a foundation. They need stability. Don't change just for the sake of change or because you came back from the conference or whatever. Put some plan, put some thought, put some energy into this. I'll talk about it from a technology standpoint. 70, the data shows that 70% of all technology initiatives fail. And the number one reason why they fail is a lack of an integrated strategy with clearly defined goals. You didn't put a plan together that says, here's what success looks like. Here's how we're going to use this new technological thing. Here's how we're going to implement it. Here's how we're going to integrate it. Here's how your role is going to be. Here's how you're going to orient to it, right? You didn't have that, and you didn't say, here's what success looks like. The reality is that, and I said this earlier, is that we don't have latitude and longitude for where we're going to end up. We can't see that clearly into the future. What we do need to do is clearly articulate the cardinal directions that we're going. We are heading north, and north is kind of northwest, northeast. We're kind of veering along the lines, but we are heading north. There will be a latitude and longitude at some point, and we'll call that a milestone. We'll celebrate, we'll take a pause, and then we're going to continue going north because that's what we have to do. And I think that's the role of how you engage your evangelists, and certainly how you activate them. The last thing I'll say about that is, if you don't empower the right people in the right places at the right times and in the right manners, you are going to end up in a collision. You're going to end up in a 10-car pileup of organizational leadership, and not just positional leadership, but cultural leadership. There are people who've been in your organization for 13, 15, 20, 30 years who have as much cultural leadership and authority as you may have in your first 2 years in a positional authority. And if you don't understand how those two things work together and how you need to collaborate on that, you're going to end up in that 10-car pileup and be very, very frustrated with any kind of change initiative.
So good. I love the point to the middle manager. I love what you just shared there at the end. It makes me think about accounts that we've been successful with at BombBomb and accounts where we've struggled to kind of get that proper adoption. And it really hinges on finding those right people. And I don't just generically mean the champions, right? I mean the person that is the bridge between the person who makes the decision, we're going to buy 173 of these accounts, and I'm going to, allocate the budget for it. The people on the front lines that are actually going to implement the technology. In this case, again, I'm thinking about BombBomb and this opportunity to use video messages in a sales capacity or in a service capacity or for internal use or whatever. There's someone in between those two. It's the position could be a variety of things depending on the company, and we serve people in a variety of industries, but let's just generally call it that mid-level manager that is the bridge between those two constituents or those two stakeholders in the success of this thing. How the decision maker got sold is one thing, and there are a variety of ways that can happen. Maybe they were sold themselves on it. Maybe the idea was sold up from the mid-level manager. Maybe there were frontline people who sold the mid-level manager who then sold there's so many different ways that can happen, but without that linchpin in that process, it can all fall apart. And then likewise, it may not even be that person who is directly in the middle of these two other key constituents, the person who pays and the person who brings it to life and derives the value from it, justifying the purchase. But there are also these other people institutionally who carry a lot of weight and can be advocates to kind of carry the evangelistic message internally. And that becomes a really interesting challenge too. And the reason I dwelled in that was, A, does that trigger or inspire any other thoughts or observations from you? Because B, so many of the evangelists I've spoken to are in the private sector and specifically in software, and this is a thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think one of the things, and I'll talk about digital transformation and then kind of come outside in.
Okay.
Digital transformation, especially as we saw, I think if anybody needs an example of how impactful and how all-encompassing digital transformation can be, let's rewind the tape to 2020, this thing called COVID, where we literally changed overnight, right? We implemented a lot of technology. We pushed people out from the work center into their distributed work environments now. And now, 2.5 years later, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations kind of hitting the pause button, having to untangle and unpack all of this tech that they onboarded, sans normal processes. And they're having to try to rework and figure out strategically, where's the value? How do we do this? And so forth. What I think the growing trend is, I'm also starting to see organizations that are kind of pushing a secondary pause button and say, hey, before we just look at the tech, let's look at our ideas, let's look at our comprehension, look at our understanding of where we're trying to go, and let's do this on purpose. That's where I get to come in and help organizations and lead and help them steer in that side from a strategy standpoint. The reason I bring that up is because this transformative effort, what happens to us, it comes from a position of oftentimes it's a declaration, right? We are going to make this change. When you look at the mid-level managers, where that is kind of a rubber meets the road impact, they are not just looking at their respective section, domain, business unit, whatever. They have to interact across the entire organization, and they have thoughts and opinions and understandings and concepts of everything that's going on in the organization. I mean, think about this. You take a frontline supervisor, they have an opinion on how well marketing is doing. You take a frontline supervisor, they have an understanding and an opinion about how well product is doing, or how well operations, or how well HR is doing. But we leave their voice out of the conversations around this, and we certainly don't create a mechanism for them to contribute. So they end up, whatever HR wants to do now, the mid-level manager is like, well, we'll kind of sort of maybe do it this way because this is the easy, right? They're making this up as they go. And I'm not faulting them. I'm talking about just the dynamics here. So why is this important for an evangelist role? Why talk about this in this evangelist conversation? As the evangelist is out there, whether you have an internal voice or an external voice, you have to understand where people have kind of dug themselves in and entrenched themselves, and understand that your job is to lift them up out of that long enough to make the change, long enough to reorient into the new direction or the new thing. And you have to do that in an enticing way, right? There's a directive, right? If you don't want to play, we got something for that, right? There's a directive, but you also have an investment of time and cost and energy and everything else in training into these individuals. So you're invested in it. So you want to bring as many people with you as forward as you can. So the evangelist has to pay attention to these entrenched positions, these tenured roles, this cultural and positional authorities and voices, because that's what you're going to be working with to bring your messaging across. And if you're not paying attention to it, again, frustration is one of those, is a real cost to organizations that doesn't have its own dedicated line item.
Okay. Give me something really practical. Let's stay in this area that you're in, which is internal. And by the way, I love this, the language you used, entrenchment. That's language that I was thinking about in one of your earlier responses. Like, as soon as we make the declaration, you have you have the curious, like immediate leaders of the group slash followers of the idea because they're curious and they're ready to run. You have the people that are going to like entrench themselves deeply immediately. And then you have the big fat middle that's kind of like this wait and see, like, are those people going in the right direction or should I jump down with these folks? I love the language. Give me something really, really practical. What are some channels? What are some methods? Just talk about this communication piece from a practical perspective and maybe keep it in this zone of internal change and supporting internal change from an evangelist position. You know, because, I just think about sometimes the way that we use Slack here internally, or where I work. And it's like, there it is, but it was said once and it was said once like 2 weeks ago. Like, so just talk about communication from a practical perspective. How do you use it in a way to reach different people in different channels, cadence, tone, any other? I mean, I know that all that is variable on what are we trying to do and where am I and what's the culture of the organization. But in general, give folks who've enjoyed this so far, as I have, just some practical thoughts about communication, ways to do it, channels, frequency, etc.
No, that's great. And I'm going to answer initially by saying all of it.
Yeah.
You have to use all of it, right? You have to play to the audience. And, if your audience is reading, okay, get blogs out there or whatever. Your audience is listening, get podcasts out there, whatever the case is. When we're kind of sticking with the internal messaging, and I know that it's not that one is more important than the other, but I know a lot of organizations, especially those probably listening to this podcast, are facing internal change right now. And with so many different channels and so much noise across all the different channels, how do you actually grab the attention of your internal audience? I remember years ago, I had a chance. I was writing at the time I was writing a blog and had a chance to interview the I can't remember exactly what her title was, but she was in charge of internal communications for Southwest Airlines. And I loved her approach to how she was talking about this and how she engaged different people. And this was before we really had or understood social media the way that we understand it right now. And so how you message people is key, but what you message is just as important. And one of the things that I have found, and from a very practical standpoint, one of the things I have found is help people connect this to that, right? If you understand a particular thing, show people how they're already doing transformation, right? Digital transformation is not something, in my evangelistic role and the work that I do, I'm not telling people that digital transformation is coming in 2025. I'm telling them that it started back with the first microchip and we've been doing this ever since. And here are the different ways that you're already doing it. When they understand that this is something that they're already doing, when they understand this equals that, you start to kind of disarm defenses, and they start to listen to you a little bit more. Help people understand that the journey is going to be challenging. There are challenges, but there are also smooth places of the road, right? The journey from Kansas City to Denver definitely has hills and mountains and valleys and all that, but there's some flat road there. There's some easy traveling going along those lines. So help people understand it and get a point of what their exertion level is really going to be, kind of their level of effort. The other thing is, you talked about cadence and frequency. And there is definitely a point where there is too much. Okay, Mike, I've heard it. Thank you. Got it. Now I've turned off. Now you've become white noise in the background. I don't know that there's real science behind how much is the right amount of frequency. Maybe somebody's done a study on that, but I don't have the time to dig into that. I just kind of get a sense of the audience through feedback. Are they still engaging with me? If I sit down and I talk to them face to face, do I get the glazed look? Do I get the rolled eyes? Whatever that is. And I think the last thing that I'll say is ask questions. You cannot dismiss the power of prerogative, right? Or the interrogative, excuse me, of just getting people to engage with a question. Hey, Bob. Hey, Sue. We're talking about digital transformation. Are you Are you understanding what that means? When we talked about this thing last week, are you still struggling with that? Do you understand where we're headed with that? What does that mean for you? Where can I engage? I think the other thing an evangelist can offer is, let me know how I can be a resource for you, right? I may not have the answer, but I can be a resource to point you in the right direction, to get you. If you have a question, I'm happy to run that northbound and come back down with you. Let me be a resource for you, because we're in this together. This is a shared effort. I'm sitting on your side of the table, not across the table from you. Help people understand it from that standpoint. And, you know, I think the last thing I'll say about that it is, there are so many different channels, right? You have employee newsletters, you have blogs, you have Slack, you have these different channels. If an evangelist can be involved in and look across some of these Slack channels, I can absolutely envision catching a conversation and then taking that conversation out and kind of putting a spotlight on it to talk about, hey, I saw the group talking about this. I loved the way that they dug into this. One, you're elevating that group, you're elevating the thought leadership within that group and how they dug into that, so that you get a celebratory effect on that. But then you're also exposing the rest of the organization to what other people are doing. Hey, wait a minute, we're not the only ones working on this. Team A or Team B or Team C, they're also cranking away on this. That is powerful messaging to help people understand. It's easy to get the blinders on and think that you're the only one working. But when you start to hear, like, that's the opportunities for an evangelist. And it requires a personality that loves solving puzzles, that loves putting pieces together, that loves connecting the dots. So I think those are some of the practical avenues that people can take.
Love it. So much good advice in there. And this, of course, is why we have 30 and 60-second back buttons on our podcast player. I'm going to point to two things really quickly. One, this idea of you're already like, so basic psychology in terms of moving people is like celebrate small wins. And so this idea, I love your recommendation of, listen, you're already doing this, right? This idea of practice builds confidence, confidence builds success. You should be confident right now because you've already done some of these things. It looks like this, that, and that, and we're only going to take another additional stuff. Love that. I love this language in the vision that it creates of being on the same side of the table. I think when you're internal, that's a little bit more obvious that we are on the same side of the table. Not always, but a little bit more so. I find that especially when you're in an external posture, being on the same side of the table is a really winning thing, because I think, and it's one of the lines that we've drawn in other conversations on this show about sales versus evangelism. Sales, it can, even if you are being a great guide and a great advisor and a great support, and you're being transparent and very honest and helpful to the other person, at some point you're still sitting down to negotiate, and there is still kind of two sides to this, whereas evangelism doesn't carry that burden. At the risk of going long, and thank you so much for the time you've given me, I've got two more questions for you. One is, and I mentioned this off the top, you could describe yourself and position yourself in any way. You're serving a wide variety of people in a wide variety of roles, primarily private sector, I think, at this point, but I'm certain you would be of great value to any public sector organization that needs some guidance here too. Why the choice of evangelism? When you call yourself a digital transformation evangelist, I might ask you to echo something you've already said in the conversation, because you've already spoken to it quite a bit, but I just want to be really clear and kind of put a button on that here as we're winding down.
I think so. Where the title actually came from, I was giving a Smart Cities presentation, and at the end, somebody in the audience jokingly said, "Well, you're a digital transformation evangelist." I didn't think anything about it at the time. I was like, that was weird, but at the same time, as I walked away, I was like, that sounds kind of cool. So that was years ago, and now what I, in particular with Smart Cities, I realized that what we were trying the message we were trying to give with Smart Cities is this notion of digital transformation, and how do you capitalize on the transformation that's happening. We are evolving. Technology is allowing us to do much more. I think the other side for me in particular, because the word transformation is what I key on more than digital or more than evangelist, right? Is this transformation of constant change. And I'm saying this, nobody has told me this, but I'm saying this. I feel like I'm kind of a change whisperer, right? Change messes with people so badly, right? I don't want to do this. I don't have to do this. it requires effort and I'm not willing to give the effort. I'm just sliding till retirement. I just like all of these things come into play. And it's like my messaging around us is like, change isn't something that we should dread. Change is something that we should embrace. It's going to happen anyway. Let's lean in. Let's do it on purpose. And I think that is one of the things that I have successfully helped organizations do is metabolize their change arc. We'll call it digital transformation. We can call it a whole lot of different things, but metabolizing this change arc is one of the things that I've really done. And from 2016 to 2014 to 2018, I was contracted to speak at the General Command and Staff College for the U.S. Army. And one of the things that I talked about there was this notion of facilitating organizational change. And a lot of the topics that I talked about there, I've embedded into my own, transformation practice, if you will, my advisory role. And listening to the U.S. Army, hear this historically, this very mechanical, very militaristic organization, to hear them get the aha moment around change and embrace this, that was a huge boost for me personally. And again, that's where I kind of think along this lines of being a change whisperer.
Spoken like a digital transformation evangelist. The fun question for you, and then we'll shut it down. What is something you have identified or have been accused of evangelizing in your own personal life? Idea, product, service, practice, anything?
Yeah, it has to be this idea of just self-discipline. I maybe not even so much just self-discipline, just discipline. Like this discipline life, if you think a certain way, you're going to behave a certain way, right? The story that you're telling yourself in your head is going to affect every single thing that you do. So if you're going to make up a story, make up a good story, right? And discipline is one of those things that just says, I don't want to do this, but I got to do it, right? I don't want to do this, but I should do this. Think about saving money, think about, losing weight, going to the gym, learning a new sport, whatever it is, a new hobby. I don't want to do this, but breaking it down and taking it step by step incrementally allows you to do a lot of different things. So I don't know that I've ever been accused of that. It's just, that's the thing that I know governs my life, is just like, go ahead and, embrace the suck and go do it.
So much good stuff there, Mike. You are awesome. Mike Grigsby has been our guest here. Mike, if folks have enjoyed this, which if they're with us at this point in the conversation, I know that they did.
Right.
How would you encourage people to follow up with you, learn more about the work that you're doing, and can maybe connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the easiest ways is on LinkedIn. Find me on Mike Grigsby on LinkedIn, or my website, MWGrigs.com.
Super. I'll link those up in the description of this podcast. Mike, thank you so much for all the time you shared here, all the wisdom. There are a number of trails I wanted to go down, but I didn't. And here we are still closing in on an hour. So thank you. We'll have to have another conversation, some of it recorded, some of it not. Really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ethan. Happy to be a part of it.
That wraps up this episode of Chief Evangelist. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Ringmaster Conversational Marketing for helping bring these episodes to you. With any thoughts or questions about the Chief Evangelist role, message me on LinkedIn. I'm Ethan Beute, ETHAN BEUTE. For show notes and more of these conversations, visit chiefevangelist.com.